So last night I just completed the documentary Thank You Goodnight by Bon Jovi, or it's a documentary about the band Bon Jovi, celebrating their 40 years as a rock band. It's been getting a lot of attention and press coverage since its release on Hulu, and with Bon Jovi's newly released album this past weekend, I thought it'd be an appropriate time to discuss it. Some of you may know this, but for all of you who don't, I've been a Bon Jovi fan since I was 17. The first time I ever heard their music was It's My Life from the year 2000 when I was 10 years old, and to this day it still remains my favorite Bon Jovi song. And then a few years later, I heard the song Living on a Prayer in the movie Charlie's Angels Full Throttle, in the scene where Drew Barrymore's character talks about her past, and we see her singing along to it in the car with her one friend. And it wasn't until a few years after that when I realized that it was the same band, and I thought, wait, that's the same band who did It's My Life? But when it comes to music, the Rolling Stones and Bon Jovi were like really big inspirations for me as far as my overall viewpoint on life and the world in general, I guess, if that's the right way to put it. My dad put the Stones in my face. My mom put Bon Jovi in my face at a certain point in time. And Bon Jovi had made an appearance on American Idol when they were doing a Bon Jovi special. For some reason, I was really into American Idol. Also because Carrie Underwood was on there at one point and I wanted to see who would follow after that. I don't know. But it was after that that I decided to educate myself on Bon Jovi's music, and they easily went right into my top favorite bands of all time. It's really easy for me to talk about just how influential these guys have been for the last 40 years, with songs like Living on a Prayer, You Give Love a Bad Name, Wanted Dead or Alive, which those three songs got him into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame some years back. And there's a reason why those three songs are still played on classic rock and greatest hits radio stations all these years later. I even had a chance to see him 3 times in concert, twice in Philly, once in Allentown, which is where I got the shirt from for the This House Is Not For Sale tour. But those 3 times that I saw him in concert, it was never a disappointment in the least bit. And along with other rock bands that I either really love or have a lot of respect for, such as Queen, Pearl Jam, Led Zeppelin, the Beatles, those guys along with Bon Jovi I consider to be the golden standard when it comes to what I think makes good rock music. On top of that, with Jon Bon Jovi himself, a lot of people have talked about how he's a very respectable type of guy. He's a very charitable person too, to the point where he's opened up his own soup kitchen. He sometimes will be seen running it, helping out the staff members in there, and he'll just go to have normal conversations with the people that come to his restaurant. Whenever you see somebody who's as famous like him, to me, that really speaks wonders about the kind of character that he has. Another case in point, Dave Grohl from the Foo Fighters, and even maybe to a certain degree, Eddie Vedder. But on the subject of the documentary, this really has 2 plot points that are going on. One chronicling the past 40 years of the band, being told through the story of the current band members along with Richie Sambora, who left in 2013, along with the current storyline where we see John struggling to recover from his vocal cord surgery. Each of the band members, past and present, along with other agents and managers that were with Jon Bon Jovi at one point in time throughout their career, give their very honest and insightful takes on how they were viewing certain things as bands started to rise to prominence in the culture, and how certain tensions started to brew at certain points in time whenever they started to hit a certain high or low spot in their career. Starting all in the beginning when John and the guys were born and raised in the 1960s, growing up in a small town in New Jersey, not too far from New York City, where John was instilled with really good, hard-working values, those of which he carried into his music career, and explains somewhat of why he is at the point that he is right now with his vocal cords, and how he would just give 110% every time he was on stage. Which on the one hand is very commendable, but at the same time, stuff like that does come at a cost. But they talk about how they would get small gigs in clubs and gymnasiums and various other areas that were very local to them, how they were inspired by other great rock bands and musicians at the time, but most importantly, Bruce Springsteen, who before Jon Bon Jovi was practically the king of the state of New Jersey, for crying out loud. Now, I'm not really a fan of Bruce Springsteen and his music, but I do recognize the impact that he's had on popular music. Then as they get into the 1980s, when they recorded the song Runaway, which was their first big song, and if I'm remembering this correctly, they managed to give it to a radio DJ in New York City. Within about a day or so, when the song was first heard, everybody was calling in asking for a copy of that record, which therefore propelled them into the spotlight, leading us to the famous 3 songs that they're most famous for from their album Slippery When Wet in 1986. I'm not going to remember every single detail that was mentioned in here because each episode was about an hour long and I would watch it maybe one every couple days or so. And sometimes with a show, I guess we're going to call it a show like this. For me, I like to let it marinate and soak in and just kind of absorb what I was watching rather than just going into the binging routine, which does have its place, but it's not really something that I like to do. It takes a very special person to do that. Then they cover the height of their fame in the 1980s with the Slippery When Wet tour and their world tour that they did for their album New Jersey, which came out in 1988. Talking about how they came up with the song Bad Medicine, which Richie Sambora was dating this woman who turned out to be a stripper or a prostitute of some kind, and he literally just started singing randomly in a swimming pool, "Your love is like bad medicine." And apparently John was nearby and heard him saying that and went, Don't forget that. We might need that for later. I don't know how that works, but hey, what did Sir Francis Drake say? Greatness from small beginnings? It's true. But what still kind of got me, and I knew this knowledge beforehand, was the 2 world tours they did almost back to back within a year of each other. They did one world tour for Slippery When Wet, 86 to 87, and then a year after that last tour ended, they jumped into another world tour for 2 years. 2 world tours back to back. Obviously, I'm not a musician, but that's a lot for one person to handle. I guess in hindsight, you could chalk that up to them being really young and excited for what they were about to get themselves into. And they were eager to prove themselves on the next round since they already shown that they were capable of putting out really popular music. So with Jon's strong work ethic, he was determined to do that exact same thing again. Unfortunately, it led to some very awkward and tense encounters during the last days of their New Jersey tour. And in the years since then, whenever they would do a long tour, they would take long breaks in between. Much, much smarter thing to do. And there was a sabbatical that they took where they didn't talk to each other for about a year or so, until finally they decided to converge after doing their own solo projects, where they would allow one to talk about how they felt without interrupting each other. During that sabbatical, Jon went on to create his own solo work for the movie Young Guns 2, or was it Young Guns 1? Now I'm going to lean towards the sequel. Blaze of Glory, which came out the year that I was born. The band will sometimes play it on stage with him, and it is for all intents and purposes considered a Bon Jovi song. On the subject of them reuniting in the early 1990s, I really liked hearing them talk about how they managed to find a way to stay relevant, even with the all-present changes happening around them in the music scene. Now that grunge has come onto the scene from the city of Seattle, we get a mention of Nirvana, Alice in Chains, and even Pearl Jam, showing us a glimpse of Eddie Vedder on a talk show that he appeared on at the time. Just seeing him on there for that brief second, I went, oh my god, there's Eddie! But with Bon Jovi's album at the time, Keep the Faith, it was a complete departure of the sound that they put out in the 80s, but a much required one. Because when you're an artist of some kind, at some point, you do have to change it up in order to stay relevant.
If we do a bunch of songs that are too similar, it drives us crazy. That's why we make songs that don't sound the same. And then we do the different, and what happens?
It's important to stay true to your roots, but it is okay to go off recipe and experiment a little bit. Although sometimes it doesn't always work in your favor, but that all comes down to personal opinion and taste. But to go into the present storyline that they show throughout this series, as of the last few years, Jon Bon Jovi has been struggling with his singing voice, so he had to go through vocal surgery in order to hopefully get some of that energy back that he's been lacking for so long. Shania Twain went through a similar thing some time ago, but she's managed to come out of the other side of that. In the case of Jon, though, we still have yet to see what's going to come out of it, but seeing him go through all these different exercises and rehabilitation procedures that is required by his doctor, at times I found it very heartbreaking, and you could see some of the conflict behind the eyes and whether or not he should actually still go through with this. He's still maintaining a sense of hope that he could go back up on stage and do it again, but I could pick up on some sort of lingering fear behind the eyes that maybe he's kind of past that point already. I guess to jump ahead to the ending of the series, it ends on a note of to be determined, where he does want to go out for one more last hurrah, but if it turns out he can't do so, then he could just close the chapter knowing that he gave it his all. As for me personally, I would love to see him go out one more time on another world tour of some kind at least. If he manages to do so, and he and the band show up in a place like Philly or Hershey, or Allentown even, you could count me in to see that at least one more time. If they decide it's not for the best, there's nothing wrong with that either. I don't really think he has anything left to prove, but if he feels like he can do it one more time, then we'll see what happens. I'm gonna try to go back through the documentary and see what he said about a certain period of your life where once you hit your 20s, you feel a certain way, your 30s you feel a certain way, and then 50s and 60s you start to cement your legacy. I can't remember exactly how he put it, but one way or another, Jon continues to impress me with his wisdom on life. One post that I saw him share on Facebook and Instagram not that long ago, enjoy the moments before they become memories, really just stopped me dead in my tracks.
Never was going to be a coulda, shoulda, woulda. Too many people I've met are, I could have done that, I should have done that, I would have done that. Me, I said, let's go.
They chronicle the history of the band with them changing up their sound once again with It's My Life, Who Says You Can't Go Home, which has a very big country flair to it, and expanded Bon Jovi's audience into the country music crowd. I don't really have one favorite or the other when it comes to Who Says You Can't Go Home. Either one is fine with me. I'm not really into country music as much, but the vocals from Jennifer Nettles on the alternate version I think is a really big compliment for Bon Jovi's sound. Then they talked about the album The Circle, which was the tour that I first saw Bon Jovi when I was about 19 or 20 years old at the time, and at that period, Richie was starting to go through his own personal turmoil, going through a divorce from Heather Locklear, losing his father, battling alcoholism, and trying to raise his now teenage daughter, combined with Jon recruiting a recording artist, or a recording producer actually, who took over a lot of certain duties that Richie would normally do with Jon in the recording studio. With all those things combined, I think that really pushed Richie to the breaking point, that he decided on a whim to not even show up for a concert that they had scheduled. And the reactions from the band and the fan base as a whole, myself included, what now? And seeing Bon Jovi trying to pick up the pieces and come to terms with the fact that his best friend was not going to come back to the band, I started to really feel for him. And to see him carry on the band even without Richie in the mix, I think was a really admirable thing to do, even though many fans are still hoping somewhere deep down that Richie's going to come back and reunite with the band, just like the Beatles fans did when the Beatles broke up in the early 70s. Now, with the case of Bon Jovi, they managed to see somewhat of a return to form when they got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and Richie came back for that one night. But still, and I can vouch for this, it's not the same without Richie. This is not the first time that rock bands have experienced a departure of a certain band member. The Stones went through it at one point in time, Pearl Jam has had it with their drummer, and Fleetwood Mac has done that too with Stevie Nicks firing Lindsey Buckingham, which is a whole another hornet's nest entirely. I mean, if you want to talk about drama in a rock band, check out some of Fleetwood Mac's behind-the-scenes stories. There's some spicy stuff that went on during those years. Them and the Black Crowes. Phew! So they recruited Phil X, who had collaborated with other various musical artists in the music scene, and to hear it from his perspective, he was in a very awkward position following up on someone that the fans had revered for so long. But now I think he's kind of cemented his own identity with the band after playing a lot of the classic hits that the band was known for, and then when they recorded their own album, he was able to really come into his own. He's not Richie Sambora, but I don't really get the impression that he's trying to be. This documentary, if anything, as far as Phil X goes, it made me understand the predicament that he was in, because to follow up on Richie Sambora, those are some big shoes to fill, and I do not envy him in the slightest. But along with Richie's departure, Jon has had a habit of really giving it 110% on every night that he's performing with the band, and it got to a point where the third time I saw him in Allentown, I could tell that something was off. Certain points he would just let the crowd sing certain lines in the song. His voice sounded like it was losing some steam, and my mom pointed it out to me at the time as we were leaving the arena. It was kind of hard to see. And even his wife Dorothea, who he's been married to for 35 years, pointed out during one of his shows in 2022, "Jon, that was not good. You need to get some kind of medical help." The vibe that you get from the band members as we see them responding to his performance, it's pretty clear that they know that something's off, but when your wife tells you, then you should pay attention. Now, on the subject of his wife Dorothea, they don't really focus on her too much. It's really about the band and their endeavors as rock stars. Some people have come out and said stuff about Jon Bon Jovi with the 100 Girls thing and how his wife was apparently willing to overlook all that stuff for money reasons. Whether or not that's actually true, I honestly am not really interested in that. In fact, I never really liked that whole celebrity tabloid gossip garbage. I think from what I could tell, Jon Bon Jovi's a really cool guy. A little bit of an ego, but when you're in that line of work and you've been in there for so long, you kind of need that after a while. Look at Freddie Mercury. He was very much a diva. I think you could say a similar thing for Jon Bon Jovi. Not a perfect person, but I think all around, mostly, a really good guy. Just my own personal observation, though. So, no, I don't pay attention to any of that 100 Girls claim stuff, and I don't really think it's anybody's business either. But back to Richie's departure, I really do like how this documentary was willing to show him giving his side of the story on certain things, not just with the band prior to his departure and then afterward. Both sides have maintained that there's no bad blood between the two, but I can't help but wonder if he does feel some sort of resentment towards Jon for excluding him from certain recording sessions. Maybe Jon's ego got in the way. I don't really know. They haven't really talked much about that kind of stuff, and I don't really think it's something that maybe they want to discuss. I can only speculate on that. I wish it did go a little bit deeper, but maybe they don't want to go into that stuff too much because they feel like it's irrelevant. But if there really is no grudges being held, well, that's pretty big, even for a band like Bon Jovi, because usually, whenever there's a feud among band members, it gets really ugly. As I mentioned earlier, Black Crowes and Fleetwood Mac are some of the prime examples. And I guess maybe Pink Floyd. Yeah, those are the three big ones. But I think with Jon's need to give it 110% every night that he performs, Richie's departure, I think, really took a toll on him. Because if you watch how he performed on stage, his voice gradually started to lose its momentum. The fact that probably his best friend that he's ever had in his life decided to not come back at all, I think that really deeply affected him, and not for the better. I'm not trying to throw blame on either side. I'm just saying from what I've been able to observe through this documentary and seeing how all the band members had processed the sudden departure of Richie, I really think for Jon in particular, it was a really hard pill for him to swallow. But I did love seeing how he did not let that drag him down. He decided to go on regardless of whether or not Richie was going to come back. The only thing we have control over in life is a response to a certain situation that's been dealt to us. He and the band members chose to keep going forward. That's a major plus for a rock star like Bon Jovi. And then with the final episode, as I mentioned earlier, with him kind of being on the fence on whether or not he should actually go back on stage or just hang it up for good, we do see one more focus on him recording the album 2020, which originally was not supposed to be as relevant as it is right now in the years since then. But given Jon's political stances and with what was going on with Trump's administration at the time, I wasn't too surprised that Jon was going to put out something that was very socially conscious. Having listened to some of the songs off of that album, it's not making an overt political statement or telling people to lean a certain way, which I know some political talking heads on one side of the aisle were going to accuse him of doing so. Songs like Do What You Can, Unbroken, and American Reckoning, you can pretty much guarantee where he stands politically, but I never really got the impression that he was trying to beat people over the head with what he believed in. Now, Jon Bon Jovi has not been shy from giving his own opinion on certain political topics. He's endorsed plenty of Democratic candidates throughout his career, including Barack Obama, Al Gore, Hillary Clinton, and most recently Joe Biden. If you're someone who doesn't really sit well with that kind of thing, that's something that you just have to get over, because everyone's allowed to have their opinion. Oh, and apparently Brian May, the guitar player of Queen, gave him some insight on how to conduct themselves while they're touring, or maybe not go so deep into jumping into the next tour or whatever. I can't remember exactly how it was said, but one of you guys pointed it out to me. If that's true, I wish they would have talked a little bit about that, but I realize that you can't really cover everything in one episode that lasts for about an hour or so. Nevertheless, though, I was really pleased to see what came out of this documentary, and if anyone is curious if you're a Bon Jovi fan or not, or if you're just into rock music in general, I would strongly recommend that you give this a watch. It's at times very eye-opening, emotional, yet uplifting and inspiring in all the right ways. And as a Bon Jovi fan, it did a lot for me and made me appreciate them as artists a lot more than I did before. So those are my thoughts on Thank You Goodnight. Thanks again, guys, for watching. Comment below and tell me what your thoughts are on this documentary if you've seen it, and as always, see you in the next one.